Welcome to the 8th episode of my series of video articles on how to write short stories. This is the 4th article in the series going into more detail on the different story types that were identified and codified by Damon Knight. He did that in this book, Creating Short Fiction. I've said before, it's the best book on writing short fiction that currently exists. The explanation story we're going to look at today is we're going to look at the 4 core elements, key characteristics, when you should use this story type, and some examples. And again, as we've done in previous videos, I'll give you some short story examples, but I'll also give you some film examples as well, so that you can, if you've not read the short stories that I recommend or not familiar with them, you've got something that will give you a familiarity with this story type. So, the core elements. First one is these stories, and because of the name, this shouldn't be a surprise, focus on explaining mysterious events or circumstances. That's kind of the core engine that drives the story. And reader interest is created by the reader being curious about the unexplained events or the phenomena that you'll find in the story. Clues are revealed that help the reader with understanding what's happening. And the conclusion to the story is a complete explanation that closes all the story loops that have been opened up, and it satisfies the reader's curiosity. So you can already see, or I'm sure you're already guessing, that a classic use of the explanation story is for mysteries and thrillers. Let's look at key characteristics. Relies heavily on creating reader curiosity to drive reader interest rather than necessarily engagement with the character or engagement with exciting events in the plot. It often deals with unusual occurrences or behaviours, and these are not just, so you might think, that could be things like horror stories, and Stephen King does use this type quite a lot in his short stories, but it can also be character behaviours, and the protagonist has to find out why certain characters are behaving in certain ways. Can involve investigation / gradual discovery of clues which lead to the conclusion, and the resolution comes from understanding what's happening and the explanation of what's been happening rather than necessarily action. When you should use this story type: when curiosity is the prime factor that's going to drive the reader interest. So it's not complex characters, it's not detailed plots with lots of interesting things going on. You can combine story types and have things like that happening, but in a short story itself, you probably don't have room for that. And you're probably, if you're looking to do that, you're probably looking at least novella length, or developing characters over serial fiction or a novel. You also use this story type when understanding what's happened is more important than action. Use this story type when gradual revelations, clues, things that lead the reader to discover for himself, this is what's going on. When these gradual revelations create impact, the explanation story is probably the story type you want to use. And also for stories where a piece of knowledge provides the resolution to the story, discovering a piece of knowledge, completing a puzzle. Let's look at some examples. In short stories, The Pedestrian by Ray Bradbury, another great early or quite early-ish Ray Bradbury story. The Fall of the House of Usher, a classic Edgar Allan Poe story. The Reach by Stephen King, although that is more of a kind of a thriller version of this story type. The Adventure of the Speckled Band by Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes story, of course. Let's look at some film examples. Rosemary's Baby. The explanation at the end of Rosemary's Baby is why everyone's been behaving quite so strangely towards her and towards her baby, and what exactly the baby is and who the father is. Citizen Kane. The film starts with the main character's death, and he says one word, Rosebud, and then the film explains what that word means to him as it looks at his life. Chinatown, the main character has to try and discover why the events that are happening in the Chinatown movie are happening, and the explanation for it, which is perhaps more mundane than he originally expected, are what drive the conclusion. And then Arrival, I think 2016, 2017, something like that, the science fiction story. That one's also another example of an explanation story. And then finally, Gone Girl, the thriller with, I forget the name of the actress. She was in one of the Tom Cruise, Jack Reacher stories. Great actress, interesting film. So these are all examples of Rosamund Pike. There we go. These are all examples of this type of story structure, and give you an idea of when you might use it, what kind of genres. You'll see if you look at the films, particularly Rosemary's Baby is kind of psychological horror film. Chinatown is a dark, gritty noir thriller. Gone Girl is a thriller. Citizen Kane's slightly different genre-wise. And then Arrival is a science fiction story. So it does cover, and you can use it in horror, mystery, thriller, those kind of commercial genres. So that's the example story. The next video article, we're going to look in more detail at the solution story type, and this will be the last of these ones, because the sixth, I think I mentioned in the previous video, the sixth story type that Damon Knight identified is much more suited to literary fiction, and as I've said several times already, literary fiction of any sort is not something that I'm looking to write. I'm much more focused on commercial fiction. We'll look at the core elements, key characteristics, when you should use the story type, and of course there'll be some examples. So until then, if you need to contact me, drop me an email, paul@deliberate-practice.com, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And I'll see you in the next video when we look at the solution story type.